Well, welcome, John. John Zimmerman. Actually, John was my schoolmate like back a long time ago at Carnegie Mellon, and yep, it was great to get connected again, John. And so John is a Tang Family Professor of AI and HCI at Carnegie Mellon University. And so not only he understands AI, but he's also a designer. So I think that's a really cool point because I think our community of UX designers, we want to know like how we can benefit from knowing about AI or, prepare ourselves for the future, right? So John, he's a UX and service designer who has designed like many human AI interfaces for more than 20 years. So human AI interaction, human robot interaction, and innovation with analytics and AI. So he has also published more than 150 papers, is a member of ACM Chi Academy. And so he invented like how we scroll on like smartphones. He teaches UX, design, service design, lean startup, on the design of AI products and services, and on design theory at Carnegie Mellon. So without further ado, so John, tell us, what do you actually do as a, like, how does, I think most people in this community, there are UX designers or want to become UX designers. Like, how does AI, like, what do you do at your work? Like, how does AI work with UX? Yeah.
So I'm a designer. I do research, but my research is really collaborations with technologists. And so we work on projects where I bring design thinking and they bring technology, and we explore different forms. So some of it is very technical. Can we get the technology to do this? But a lot of this is more, at least my side, is more societal. Does anybody want this? Should we even be making this? What can we learn from doing this? Yeah. Do you mind if I share my screen?
Yeah, sure, please.
Yeah, I'm gonna share the screen and just go over a little. And I want to encourage everybody just to shout out as I'm talking. All right, swap my controls here. So I've been designing AI systems for 20 years. This is actually the very first thing I designed, which was a TV show recommender for Philips. And it's back when Xena was a first run TV show. And what I remember about this is a change for me. We use decision trees. And when I was talking to the data scientists about how this TV show recommender works, they said, oh, the most discriminating feature, the thing it pays the most attention to when it makes a recommendation, is that a TV show is on after 5 o'clock. And for me, it's like, okay, so it's really stupid. But also, like, really learning machines have an entirely different way of being intelligent and building knowledge in the world. I built a number of things over the years. One of my favorite projects is this person, place, time view. We learned the pickups and drop-offs of busy families. Basically, I gave BlackBerry curves to 10-year-olds. So we learned where and when everybody goes. And then we could tell, when is there a child that probably should be getting picked up, but no parent seems to be moving towards the child. So it's like a smoke detector for forgetting your kids. Some more serious work, did a system that detects the onset of major depression for looks at changes in your sleep, your activity level, and your social actions. Some current work watches teachers teach and watches how students react as the teacher is teaching. And then it provides feedback to help them notice things that they do in order to improve their teaching. And then I'm also doing some work right now to do innovation in the ICU. So these are real life and death decisions, particularly around the use of a ventilator. But I'd say maybe 10 years ago, my work took a big pivot. And in addition to kind of making systems, I also really started to pay attention to the innovation process. Like, how is it that we make AI stuff? So I just want to kind of respond to the prompts. It's like, is AI going to replace your job? Yes. So questions? Snarky, but
You
yes,
just
but
freaked everybody out. Okay.
it totally will, but no, and it's complicated.
Oh my God.
Really, this is less of an ending and more of a new beginning. Like, we have to work differently. There's still a ton of work. AI is coming for UX, but it's coming for everything. This is, it's a universal issue. UX isn't being picked on, but what I think people don't know is that AI innovation is the total shit show. Like, nobody knows what the hell they're doing, and they really, really need design thinking. And there's a huge opportunity for design to be transformative. But if it's going to do that, it can't work the way that it currently works, particularly in the space of UX.
Can you describe why? Like, how is it working now that cannot work like this again?
Yeah, let me jump here. Oh, that's not what I wanted to do. Okay, let me jump in and just talk about the state of innovation, because maybe this will help it make more sense. So I'm sure you've seen, there's a lot of hype. Do you guys know the Kiva robots? Is this familiar?
Yeah.
This is what Amazon uses. They drive under the shelves. They organize where everything goes on the shelves, and a picker just stands there, and basically they put their hand out and the thing they need is right where their hand is. And so basically the warehouse is only robots at this point. It's just not a space that a human can be in. I'm sure you're familiar with filters. There's some ethical issues here, but this is like super mediocre AI. It's just reading facial markers and mapping graphics, but it's generated a ton of revenue and created a lot of joy for people. And then, of course, ChatGPT. We can talk a little more about what it is, but there's tons of success that implies we know what we're doing, but we don't. Because right now, almost every innovation project fails. It's like an 85% failure rate to get to deployment. And that's not even talking about things that are deployed. Their failure rate is also very high. So almost everything fails. And it's sort of like things work more by accident than by intention. Do you guys know Galactica? It was only out for a day, so you didn't miss much, but Meta put out this kind of like ChatGPT, but for scientific search. It was like hallucinating and spewing all kinds of nonsense. So one of the reasons things fail is because it's really hard to get AI to produce good output. Another main point of failure is people put AI systems out that don't generate enough revenue for the service provider to cover the costs. So you're probably familiar with Alexa. Amazon totally underwrote the cost of all of this hardware and pushed it out into the world, thinking they were going to make a ton of money when people would buy stuff on Alexa, which no one does. And so every time you use Alexa, it's recording your audio, it's sending it over to the internet to an Amazon server, which listens to it, understands the request, comes back, takes an action. So it's like, oh, Alexa, play NPR. That just cost Amazon money, but made absolutely no revenue for Amazon. They've lost $4 billion on this. They just laid off 10,000 people. But it's very easy to make things that don't make money, but cost a lot of money. The other side is you can make stuff that doesn't actually create user value. So pretty much everything done in AI in healthcare is totally disrespectful of doctors, nurses, and their expertise. and they just don't use it because they don't find it useful. And people are like, why don't they use this stuff? It's like, well, you never ask them what they want. It's kind of some low hanging fruit for UX to improve things. And then one I'm sure you're familiar with is fairness and unintended harm. These systems meant to be more objective than human actually just magnify human bias and reproduce or even amplify harm in the world. So they're tough to work with. But I think maybe kind of what's more interesting. So there's a lot of failure. What I find fascinating, and this is where I think designers can act, are the things that no one's making, but it seems kind of obvious, like, why aren't they making it? So I like to pick on Starbucks. If any of you have ever used the Starbucks app, it uses a gift card. So Starbucks gets the money long before you get a coffee. And it saves Starbucks a bunch of money on credit card transactions because the card reloads like every $25. But you're doing $3, $4 transactions, and they're avoiding all of those credit card fees. But the Starbucks app never learns who pays for their coffee with the app, and it never lands that user on the Pay tab if they open the app while inside of a Starbucks. This is not a difficult inference to make. And it's obviously right in the strategic value of Starbucks. It's what customers want, but somehow a world-class UX design team can't simply see that opportunity. Similarly, Instagram really wants influencers to post because when an influencer posts, they attract a lot of eyeballs, that absorb a lot of ads, generate revenue for Instagram. But the Instagram app never learns which tags influencers repeatedly use, and it forces them to type the tags over and over every time they post. Again, not a difficult use of AI, an obvious use, but a company with world-class data scientists and world-class UX designers kind of can't see the super obvious things. And what we see when we talk to companies is data science teams keep thinking of things nobody wants, design things, think of things no one can build. And there's a reason for this. There's a bunch of reasons. One is that designers are generally not brought onto a project until after they've already decided what to make. And when I started, that's how all UX was done. We called it lipstick on the pig. Like if you're making the wrong thing, no amount of design is going to make it not the wrong thing. So how does design get to play a role earlier when the application you're going to build gets selected? Additionally, it's really hard for designers to understand what AI can do. And AI, like everybody that so if you think of how designers work, Schoen uses this idea of a jazz musician who is so familiar with their instrument, they can make up music as they play. And that's this idea of conversation with material. It's that kind of creative moment. So when you're designing, you have such familiarity with the material, whether it's computation or cardboard, whatever you're working with, you can envision things people haven't thought of, but we don't have a way of doing that with AI. And if you read about AI, they only talk about the mechanisms. They talk about how it does something, but what designers need to know is what can it do? It would be like, we might play with plywood to get a sense of like the forms it can create, but a mechanistic view of plywood would be like, how does glue work? And that doesn't actually help you think of interesting new forms. Data science is new, and data scientists don't integrate well in companies, and people can't really understand what they say they can do. And their solution is to try to teach people data science, and that doesn't work. So they'll say things like, oh, we can get you 90% performance. And you're like, okay, is that good? And so for automatic speech recognition, if you're at 90%, that's like one word in every sentence is wrong. Is that good? Is that good enough? And so I think that idea of like discovering good enough, well, if you're doing a transcript for a voicemail, it's plenty good enough to know if you need to listen to the message or not. It's sort of, can you recognize where you can produce value? Another problem in this space is designers and non-data scientists think of AI as superhuman intelligence. And this is really the press, because they love these clickbaity stories, you know, Target knows teens pregnant before parents. Google engineer says chatbot sentient, right? That there's this constructed view that AI is superhuman. That is totally not at all what AI is. And so when we think about it, like when I get designers to generate AI ideas, they tend to only think of things where there's a lot of uncertainty about can AI even do it, and where it produces really complicated output. So it's very hard to imagine all the ways this could go wrong. And what they never do is focus on where are we very sure we can do something and the output's super simple. And we don't know how to like change that kind of ideation to make people work differently. We think one of the issues is ideation. So this is a typical data science process. Problem formulation is the first step. Typically, if you read a book on data science, problem formulation gets one paragraph and everything else gets a chapter. And so data scientists aren't taught to ideate, to think of 100 things to build and then systematically evaluate them and pick the best one. They just pick something and start building. And if you look at like an agile process in most companies that are making digital things, those companies don't know what happens before agile. They know, oh, we're doing agile now, we have this brief, we're building from this, but it's like, yeah, but where did that brief come from? I don't know. Well, that's that lack of ideation. And designers know how to ideate, and this is definitely a place we can step in and help. The UX process doesn't work. Right now, we have some tools to give you a sense of what AI can do, and we have some guidelines that you can use at the end, but we have nothing in the middle. And the AI innovation process starts in the middle of the double diamond. You start by searching for an application based on the data that you have. And that is not at all where UX is comfortable starting. So it's not really user-centered design anymore, because you've already chosen a data science team. So you've already predetermined that AI is the solution. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with matchmaking, but matchmaking is a different innovation technique where you start with a capability and search for the best customer. So you can say, oh, I've made Velcro, my new invention. Who needs Velcro? Who could benefit from this? And I search for customers. And so it seems on the surface that matchmaking could work, but I want to say no. Matchmaking also doesn't work, because when you're innovating with AI, you've generally already defined a data set that you're using, which then defines a user. So it's not matchmaking and it's not user-centered, and we mostly don't know what to do. So I'm going to go quick and just show you some things, some ways that people are making this better. So what we've been doing is hanging out with designers at Google, Meta, Philips, places like that, Accenture, where people are innovating with AI every day. And one of the things we've noticed is they've internalized a bunch of capabilities. They have a sense of what AI can do, and they have examples that they use to talk about it. In addition, Accenture's, or now, Accenture Song, used to be Fjord, has this innovation center in Dublin, which is super cool, where they sit service designers and data scientists side by side. There's also UX designers and these new weird people they call data designers. And I can't quite describe what they do, but they're able to do things that we haven't seen anybody else in the world do. But they've made some super small changes that seem to have been very powerful. So if you've ever done service blueprinting, they do service blueprinting, but they've added an additional swim lane on the bottom, a data layer, where they look at the flow of data across what they're looking at or what they're thinking of making. And suddenly you have a data pipeline, and now I have a boundary object to have a conversation with a data scientist. Another thing they do when they're wireframing is they label where every piece of information is coming from. So you don't have these, oh, magically this thing appears. And then it kind of forces the designer to go and talk to a data scientist to say, oh, can I get this? Can I use that here? And those kind of more casual interactions seem to lead to some magic. One of the things my team did was we spent 4 years on this because we have a ridiculous amount of time. We've been really trying to understand AI capabilities more from a design point of view. What can it do? So we started with 12 industrial domains, looked at 40 AI features that repeatedly show up across applications and are commercially successful. And we distilled this down to 8 capabilities with examples. We're like problem solved. Then we ran a pilot study getting designers to design from this, and it was just a total failure. So what was interesting is designers could produce ideas that used more of the AI capabilities, but none of their ideas were any more buildable. They're still thinking of things that are ridiculously difficult to build. So for us, it was like, oh, crap, this is not working. And we searched around and we're struggling with this, and we came across this metaphor that Google uses. So this is Casey Korsakov. She's the chief decision scientist at Google, and she trains their AI teams. And when she wants them to look for use cases where AI is useful, she uses this metaphor of drunk island. So she said, you need to think of AI as an island full of drunk people. It can do things really fast because there's lots of drunk people, and it can handle an inhuman quantity of data because there are a lot of drunk people. But they're drunk people, so don't expect high quality performance. So where do you need speed? Where do you need scale? But maybe you don't need quality. These are like the rich spaces, but we don't really know how to search for that. In our work, we're trying to think like, what is the opportunity space? So we've broken it down thinking of AI performance. How good does it have to perform before it's valuable? And how hard is this task for a human to perform? And we went back and we mapped the 40 AI features that we'd done in our taxonomy. And what we saw was like, actually over half of them show up on the left side, where they're like less than 90% accurate. And that was super interesting. And it was like, oh, well, how do I get a team to ideate ideas where they only need kind of mediocre AI performance? So to ground this a little, if you think of like, if you're doing AI in healthcare, like medical image analysis, that's a really hard task for a human. And it needs to be really accurate or it's just dangerous. But if you think of things like Face ID, that's actually a super simple task. That's what every bartender does. They look at your driver's license, they look at you and they say that is you or that is not. Simple task so we can perform it at high quality. In the lower left, things like step counters, super easy, like a child of 5 could tell if you're taking a step. They just couldn't pay attention long enough to count them all in a day. But a digital step counter is super inaccurate, but it's consistent. So it'll still tell you if you're taking more or fewer steps. And then things like language translation, super difficult. It's very hard for humans to do this well. But but people are using AI systems that do it really, really mediocrely because it's a case of something is better than nothing. And that's generally the space where it's really effective. So some work that I've been doing in the ICU, we just did regular brainstorming, but instead of trying to get designers to come up with the ideas, we put domain experts and data scientists together and said, can designers help them ideate? Can we kind of get them to generate a bunch of ideas when that's not their normal process? And we could, but when we mapped it to an impact effort chart, everything showed up on the right-hand side, meaning everything was super high effort and half of the things were sort of low impact. So it's like, yeah, we can get them to ideate, but they don't come up with very good ideas. So we really thought about how do we kind of combine user-centered design and matchmaking. And so we did another brainstorming session. We primed them with sort of very simple examples of AI where it's either dealing with a very simple task or it's got very mediocre performance. And then said, can you think, is this useful to you? So instead of saying, what do you need? It's more like, well, AI can do this. Do you need this? And when we generated ideas with them, now we got a much better spread and we were generating a lot of sort of low effort, high impact ideas. And in addition, we got better coverage of the whole design space. So when we first started, the ideas they were thinking of were things like, oh, delirium. I need to manage sedation for a patient. If I give them too much sedative, they get delirium. If I don't give them enough, they're in pain and they're pulling out their ventilator tubes and it's impacting healing. Can AI help me find exactly how much sedative to give? I'm like, no, that's like super dangerous and you should avoid using AI for that. And then we were talking to them about, like, Amazon pre-ships stuff. So like at Christmas time, it pre-ships Christmas lights. So it's close to people's homes because it's anticipated they're going to buy them. And they're like, oh, we could use something like that. We order drugs from the pharmacy every day. And sometimes it takes 3 to 6 hours for the drugs to get here. And, nurses are faster if they can give all the drugs at once, as opposed to giving them one at a time when they come in from the pharmacy. We could look at what's wrong with everybody here and just pre-order their drugs, where the worst outcome is we have to order new drugs from the pharmacy. So it's kind of this low-hanging fruit, and it's something that a human's not doing. So I want to come back, like, is AI going to replace your job? And I'm going to say, yeah, but right now, kind of innovation is like an accidental success more than an intentional success. So sure, but things are moving really slowly. It may seem fast, but if you're in the weeds of it, it's not fast at all. So I think over a long time, AI might replace UX, but not immediately. But where it will start to work is really with the most tedious, mundane, and repetitive work that you do. So if you use Photoshop and you're sort of removing objects and creating backgrounds, it's going to be awesome at that. Selecting objects, if you spent time with the lasso, all of that, it will now be automated for you. Generation and replication of visual styles across a bunch of artifacts. I don't know if you guys have used GitHub's Sidecar. It just sort of programs with you. You can ask it for things and it gives you sample code. So instead of having to go look up how to do something, you describe what you want and it just generates the code. And it's not perfect, but it's actually pretty close to what you need. And so if you've got reasonable prototyping skills, you can definitely integrate that and save a ton of time. I'm also thinking of things like storyboard generators, space of these sort of design artifacts that we spend a lot of time crafting. Will move away from all of that crafting, but still be doing a lot of the creative work. This is an example. My PhD student is doing a study right now of agents to help elders age in place. And she needed some images. And so she was using Midjourney to produce royalty-free stock photography. And it's like, oh yeah, designers will totally use this to not have to pay for something. It's useful, but she kind of really had to know what she wanted. It's not creative in I'm going to tell you what a customer would want sort of way. I think the shift in UX practice is going to be more in the space of design innovation, of design saying, what should AI do? And how can we come up with ways that AI is co-creating value? How is it creating value for users and for service providers? That is still very much a design search. Additionally, thinking of the social and ethical boundaries that it should cross, designers can do an excellent job of sort of demarcating that. I think as this moves forward, it's really a lot more design as facilitator than design as idea generator. Now our job's going to be helping users generate ideas for themselves by mapping them with data scientists on sort of the experts on what can be done, users on what they need, and designers as experts on how are we effectively generating a broad set of ideas to explore the problem solution space. As we do this, there will definitely be a shift towards service, because it's really about strategy now, and it's going to be away from the sort of minutia of details that are more important in UX and particularly in UI. And I think there's going to be more designers that, more non-designers that are going to be doing UX, that the barriers to entry will go down. So a lot of people can sort of generate simple interfaces for themselves using AI. They don't need a designer for that. And I think in this more radical future, although it's coming soon, we'll actually begin to work more with AI as a user. So part of that will be actually need to design things that's easier for AI to work with, easier for it to understand and make sense of. But also AI is sort of a source of qualitative data. So people have started trying to interview LLMs like ChatGPT, and it's hard to tell if it just produces noise or if it's actually producing something that makes sense. So I'm going to stop here because the point was not to like blah, blah forever.
Yeah, so thank you, John. I think, everybody came in thinking, oh my God, is AI going to replace our UX job? But learning from you, it seems like depends on how we define UX, right? So you're saying like the low-level jobs, like creating interfaces, yeah. And actually recently, I think this service came out called Galileo. Any of you know about that? Yeah, I think it can generate a lot of UI, right? And you're saying like the strategic level of design, more, strategy, innovation,
Right.
that may not be replaced.
But I think also the place where we don't have rich design patterns. So if you think of like augmented reality, VR, these more new spaces, we don't have widgets for that. Like, how do I take an action in that space? We don't have like a set of primitives we can build from. And that's work that designers will do, but sort of as things get more and more mature, then where AI has hundreds of examples to learn from, it's going to automate that part of it. But if you're working in the part where, yeah, we just don't know what to do, that's like an awesome space for design. So I maybe give you another example. We've been looking at things like Alexa, but imagine a slightly smarter Alexa. What is Alexa going to do when a teen says, hey, tell my parents I was studying? That's an interaction design problem. Is it going to lie? Is it going to like narc? like there's a ton of unknown that really needs design thinking, because it's not like we have some objective truth that we're optimizing towards. It's like I have absolutely no idea what to do, so I need creative exploration to open up the space and really think about the rich space of possibility. That's where designers will still add a ton of value, and it's just a huge space of opportunity, because AI is just making all these new things possible, but we don't quite know how to do it. So less production and more creative exploration.
So what kind of skill sets do you think like a designer who's more on the UI, you know, you're talking about minutia of like interfaces, like to being a more strategic level designer?
Yeah, so it's painful for me to admit this, but from my time at Philips, I became a world expert on how to use a jumping highlight with a 4-directional cursor button on a remote control. Right? Like no one makes anything like that anymore. And so I don't want to blame AI. Like this is true for design. We learn things, we do things, and then those things don't matter because design has moved on to greener pastures. If you look kind of at the history of industrial design, it's just got a long timeline, so it's easier to understand. They started like kind of making consumer goods for department stores, early shopping. And then they started doing packaging to go with that, and then displays, and then, and it continued to grow and change. Now you're doing product lines, right? There's just this constant evolution of what we do. And I think UX is going to do that, and AI is really not that different. It's a new technology, but it totally needs design thinking, because no one can figure out what do people want that's valuable. And that's where designers are amazingly good. But it's going to be more like storyboarding, scenario generation, really that ideation of thinking of like, what is it people want to do? Not just like cranking through screens. So for selling shoes, like what's a web, a shopping cart transactional flow, right? Less that and more, what is not a shopping cart at all?
So I want to go back to when you say design thinking, you were showing that you guys brought the tech people to come and brainstorm with the design thinking process, right? And they were thinking very tech stuff. So is the conclusion to bring both designers and tech to brainstorm together in the design thinking process?
And users.
And users, right. So it's interdisciplinary collaboration, right?
So like, for the example of the Amazon pre-ordering, like Amazon predictive shipping, the doctors recognized, oh, we can pre-order drugs in the ICU. Like no amount of UX research in the ICU would have ever come up with that idea, right? And no amount of interviews, because when you interview them, they tell you about the things that they're uncertain about. And AI works very poorly there, right? It's going to be really awesome on textbook cases because it's had a lot of training examples, but edge cases it will suck at because those happen infrequently, so it doesn't know how to deal with them. Like again, and that's why thinking of it more as stupid, and it's really good at automating low level, tedious, mundane tasks. That's the rich space.
Yeah,
it's not the super intelligence, because it doesn't actually do
that. Right. Well, I already know friends using ChatGPT to help them with social media, like writing out because they have to generate a lot of videos and writing out the blurbs. Yeah. So it's probably going to replace some of those jobs, right? And okay, so you mentioned AI as user. Can we dig deeper into that? That's super interesting.
Well, I'm
Yeah.
sure you've already done this if you've ever created a resume, right? You're already designing for an AI to extract your data and run it through some pre-processed AI system. Like, you need to be recognized. And I'm sure you've seen a bunch of dumb advice, like you should copy all of the text in the background color, and then you have all the keywords there, and your resume. And I was like, okay, that they can definitely see that. But humans are already starting to craft things for AI systems to understand. That will become much more of a design skill, a professional design skill. But my user are AI systems that are consuming this information, so stuff gets returned in searches, which is like a weird thing. So now I have to think of AI as my user, and I have to understand its needs and its understandings, and then design things for it, which is a really weird thing to do. And it's user-centered design, but it's not human-centered design.
It's
Your
AI
user
centered
is
design.
AI.
Okay, interesting. So what about can AI or data-driven research replace qualitative user research? Like, so right now in our industry, we talk to a lot of users, we interview them like one by one, right? And usually it's like a small set, like it's 12 to 20 people.
Right.
But if AI, can, know a lot of things, like, is it possible that it can know the market?
It can know a lot of things where people talk a lot about those things.
Right.
So it will be effective for things that are highly normalized.
So for example, if we have a client and they want to know if we can sell olives in Brazil, like, okay, would they be able to get this answer?
I think what you could say is, think of it more, I want to find out what people in Brazil are getting that are like olives. Or I can look at how are people buying olives elsewhere that's not Brazil, and sort of reduce from that, like, what's the standard? Maybe there's 3 stereotypes for olive buying, and now I'm just picking which one seems closest to Brazil. But if I'm looking at something nobody does, AI has nothing to learn from. It can't. Right? If it's a new behavior, if I can't say, I can ask AI to generate a meme that is in the standard of a meme that's been around for a while. But I can't ask it, what are the memes of the future? What are those going to look like, right? Because it has no idea. It only knows what it's been trained on. So it's really good at the past, which is a lot of what we do as designers. We sort of, I'm making yet another website for buying shoes. There's not necessarily a lot of creativity in the low level, but maybe the creativity is more in the branding, right? Which is like, oh, but ours is different for these reasons, but functionally, I'm selling shoes, right? If you think of like the Nike website and the Williams-Sonoma website look almost identical, if you just abstract them to a set of design patterns and pay no attention to, right? But they're basically using a grid of returned items and breadcrumbs, right? Like all of that, it can just generate for you. And it can apply known styles. Make it look like this, right? As long as I can describe it, it can totally do that. But if I'm trying to craft a new style, it doesn't know how to do that.
So it sounds like as designers, we also need to learn how to ask the right questions for right? Because if you ask a future question, it's not going to generate anything. But if you ask,
well, it'll generate something. You can't generate, right?
You might not be able to trust it. So how do you know what you can trust?
You shouldn't trust. Like, you shouldn't use it where, like, and this is where, like, for me, this is the rich space for AI. If I'm, let's say, Nike, it's very expensive for me to read every comment that somebody's writing about Nike, right? That's a lot of interns that are looking at a lot of content. Maybe I can afford that, but I totally cannot afford to read everything people are saying about Adidas and Under Armour and like all of my competitors. So that, well, maybe a mediocre AI reading of those things is totally useful because I'm not replacing a human that's already doing high quality work. I'm doing something I would never, like it's so tedious and time consuming and so much volume, I would never have a human do it. But AI is amazing at tedious and high volume and fast.
Okay. So what kind of skills do you think designers need to acquire, like coming up?
Yeah. Seeing data as an opportunity. So when we do field work, like instead of just talking to people, pay attention to the data that they're generating, because that's a thing that you can bring into your design, but we don't look for it. And
What do you mean data they're generating?
So if you're whatever problem you're working on, oh, we're gonna make like a blood glucose meter. So I'm gonna look at like, where do you keep your drugs? How are you organizing things? How do you go to the pharmacy? Are you creating data for yourself? Do you already have tools? Oh, you know, you're using this service at your pharmacy that's already got like the last 6 years of every drug you've ever ordered. Oh, I didn't know that existed. Now I can see that. Oh, that's a data set that we could use, right? So I'm looking because we build AI things with data. And typically we don't want to wait 5 years. So if you already have 5 years worth of data, I want to figure out how to get that, right? So given the application space you're in, what's the data that you've already generated and who has it and how can I get it to think about innovating for you?
And also being able to pull that data. I mean, especially if you're talking about medical, some of the data there's privacy issues and access issues, right? Like
yeah, but again, the designers don't actually pull the data, right? Like that's the data science people on your team.
Right.
But your ability to see it, to say, oh, this data exists, because they don't go out in the field, so they just never knew that thing even existed. So in the same way, like we don't write the software, but we recognize by going into the field the situations where technical innovations would be valuable. Let me put this in a different way. The cassette recorder was an invention that let you like play back music or record music. But a boombox is an innovation because it's a recognition that somebody needs that capability and that this form would be valuable for them for like a playground or a construction site, right? You're not inventing a thing, but I'm seeing like, oh, I could make something like a Walkman because people would really benefit from a personal music experience. Or I could think of a home answering machine because, you know, sometimes you leave your house and you don't want to miss an important call. But we have this technology that can record audio. We could just put it there, right? So designers being in the world see those opportunities, but right now we don't see data, and data is part of the opportunity space.
Got it. Got it. And also, how can designers brainstorm more things that can be built and not just be in the blue sky?
Yeah, I don't know. Learning the AI capabilities helps. And like, we're super frustrated with things like Instagram and Starbucks, like these low level, like super obvious situations. It's like, they're so dumb. Data scientists would never think of them because data scientists like to do things that are hard. So yeah, that's an open question. I think kind of just being more aware of all the different ways you touch AI every day is helpful.
Where would designer learn about that? Like learn about that? What can AI do? Yes.
It's really, you'll notice it when something is wrong. So analytics are facts. So like if you go to Amazon and you buy something, it'll say, oh, people that bought this thing also bought this other thing. That is a fact. That's never wrong. It's not necessarily useful, but AI is an inference. It's like, because you bought this thing, I'm guessing maybe you want this other thing, right? Like that can be horribly wrong. So can you pay attention to where something that you're using is wrong? Ooh, that wasn't right. Why isn't it right? Is it not right because it's like just a rule and the rule just didn't apply to me now? Or is it actually making an inference and I need to notice, oh, that's like a little machine learning thing right there.
Yeah, what I'm hearing is it seems like designers really need to know how to ask questions, critical thinking, lateral thinking, much more than like making nice interfaces, to be able to see how we can apply technology in what the market needs or what users needs, right?
Yeah, but I think that attention to aesthetic pleasure is still important to sort of deal with tech that doesn't work well. And so I'm just going to talk about Snapchat filters for a second, because the augmented reality technology that maps facial markers to your face was not made so people could make Snapchat filters, right? People created that technology. And then people at Snap are like, oh my God, you know what we could do with this? We can make these funny filters, that's design. Like that is something a designer's coming up with, like, because it's totally purposeless. It's about playfulness and enjoyment and very much aesthetic pleasure. And that's just generated, I mean, it's also done horrible damage. The pretty filters have just been terrible for all kinds of reasons, but a lot of them were really much more in a playful space. So to me, kind of gaining that sensitivity, and they don't map super well, right? I mean, they're getting better, but it's like good enough to be totally fun.
Yeah.
And that discovery of like fun things is very much more design thinking, or people from like media, new media, experiential design, right? Like this is a rich space that designers are really good in. Data scientists are never going to think of that.
Yeah, so it's discovering how the technology can be applied to be useful. So, right, like in summary. Great. Well, let's open up the floor. I think there are a lot of questions. Okay. Yeah, Gregory or Jasmine, do you want to pick some or call people out?
Yeah, so the first question we had was from Tamara. If you'd like to ask your question.
Yes, the first question that I asked was actually answered by John, but the second question I have is that approach that you took by using that sort of, and I might be misnaming it, but performance expertise matrix, or that framework that you used, that sort of design-centered or centric approach to find out, AI capabilities and where it can be used in that medical field. Like, where can we find out more information about that approach? I'm facing a similar sort of problem working on use cases of AI in the field of accessibility, and we're trying to explore that right now. And it seems like an approach that can be applied. We're starting with a set of hard problems that we have, and we're trying to, like you said at the beginning, kind of like do that matching, but it's not really working that well. So, I'd love to learn more about this approach that you presented on.
Yeah, so this is still super new. And again, this was our discovery after our total failure of getting designers to make buildable stuff. What is public that I could send you to right now is if you just do a Google search for Google's drunk island metaphor. That's totally the same thing. It's like,
Okay.
oh my God, we have to think of things that aren't asking too much of AI, like that are just dumb, simple. How do we learn to like look for speed or look for scale, but not quality?
Yeah.
And yeah, I don't know. I don't have a magic way to tell you how to do it. I just know if you can do it, that's good. But how to do it is, yeah, let me know if you solve that, because we're struggling.
Great, thank you.
Like I would say one of the things we did that helped was just at the beginning of a brainstorm session, kind of talk about the dumb stuff AI does well. We're going to not talk about like what your needs are, because those are hard. We're going to talk about like AI is really good at saying if you are you or not you. Is that useful? It's really good at telling if a message is spam or not spam.
Yeah.
Right? Like, can you look around for sort of the simpler stuff and then seek usefulness from that, as opposed to coming from the human need, which is almost always not what AI can do.
Great, thank you.
Great.
Next question is from Pi Pi.
Bye pie.
Yeah.
Oh, hey, sorry. Because I asked lots of questions, so which one you are referring to?
You can just ask all of them.
So basically, I have a lot of questions. So I wonder, like, as a designer, is there any other resource for designer to better understand the AI and the system, like to either have a certain kind of foundational knowledge, like a certain when we helping or facilitate like the AI kind of related project?
Yeah, so I have nothing to offer. I can say it's hard and there's tension. So a lot of people have said, oh, you should teach designers data science. And I question that because it's sort of like saying, if you understood glue, would you be able to work with plywood better? Like, it's not really the same thing, because we are like form givers. And so what I would do instead is encourage you to collaborate with a data scientist. Can you find a project and get involved? Because the only way we've been able to do it is by doing it, not really learning about it.
Mm-hmm.
And then generally you find yourself in these weird situations like, how do you guys generate ideas? They're like, we don't know, we just work on stuff. And you're like, okay, kind of like just do a brainstorm. Have you ever done that? No, what's that? It's like, okay, gently lead you down the path of just doing sort of basic design thinking for what they're doing. And they're often like amazed that that wasn't a total waste of time. It's like, yeah, we're not here to waste your time. That's not what we do. Because they've generally never had any experience like that before.
Got it.
I have a suggestion. We have a Discord channel. Ramika, maybe you can share that. Maybe we open up a channel on Discord and everybody shares what they know, how they know about anything AI. And so we can share that and people can learn from each other. Okay. All right. Pi Pi, do you have other questions? You said you have many.
Oh yeah, sorry, I have too many. But so I wonder, like, when a designer or either designer or researcher, like when we kind of helping or facilitate like those kind of workshop, is there any kind of differences compared with the normally like other type of like brainstorming or like workshop thing? If it's different, like what is the agenda or the process will look like when running this type of thing with the the data scientist or like a domain expert kind of thing?
Yeah, so there definitely are some differences. There's a lot more uncertainty around what you can and can't do. And often that's not an easy question. Whereas if I'm like, I want people to be able to order shoes on their phone, like I don't have any uncertainty that they can do that, right? This is very much a space of uncertainty. The other uncertainty, which is maybe harder to get at, is no one knows what anything costs. So if you think of like an architect doing buildings, you can generally go to them and say, I have like $10 million and I want to build a building. And they're like, okay, for that amount of money, I can do stuff with glass and concrete and tile and steel, right? And they'll work within a budget to like help you achieve what you want. This totally cannot happen in the AI space. No one knows what anything costs or what anything will cost, like to develop or to operate. And so what we see is when people are brainstorming, they self-edit and they're like, oh, I had an idea, but I didn't share it because it felt expensive. It's like, what does that mean? It felt expensive. Oh, it just seemed like it would be expensive. Well, what about it made it seem, I don't know, it just felt that way. And so I think, like as an industrial designer, you would never like say, oh, I want to make this thing out of solid gold. And like, you know, we have a sense of what materials cost, what manufacturing costs. Even in UX, you know, when you're asking something and a PM's just going to be like, oh my God, no. Right. We understand those boundaries, but in the AI space, we have absolutely no idea. And it does change brainstorming, and it can definitely feel like you're wasting your time. But I strongly encourage you, if you're doing AI brainstorming, to do impact effort matrices and get a team to collectively plot stuff to say, well, how impactful would this be? How hard would it be to build? And to look at that and say, wow, we're not producing any ideas that are easy to build. Let's focus on that. Let's see if we can get full coverage of the board.
Wow, thank you. Yeah, because I'm thinking like to kind of organize a one, yeah, to venture kind of learning a little bit more like how to facilitate or like these type of things in the future. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, next.
And our next question is from Daniel.
Hi, John. Hi. First of all, thank you so much for your, fruitful presentation. There's a lot of things to process and to reflect on. I guess you sort of gave me an idea of some tips on working with data scientists, get to know them and facilitate more conversations like that. I'm just curious if there's any other way to work with people, any more tips to work with professionals like this, because I do get the idea as a designer often have communications issues with cross teams, for example, engineers or developers. Oftentimes they will question us, oh, how come what you are thinking is so hard and off the ground? Seems like AI is the same thing. Any other tips on become a good facilitator in a workshop like this?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is, so I want to say like my experience is going to be very different because I walk in as a professor, having done this for 25 years, right? Like, so I don't tend to run into the credibility things now, but when I was a junior designer starting out, just doing regular UX, trying to get any engineer to like think anything I had to say mattered was hard. And one of the people I saw who was super effective at this, Lyra Nikolovska, who I worked with at Philips, went off to work at Autodesk. And she used to take candy to the engineers. Very subtle thing, right? And it's like, she's very like, oh, thanks so much. I just wanted to show you the designs I'm working, right? She made them feel like she was so respectful of their time and attention. And it made her super influential without her having to be higher status than them, right? Like, because they were going to make whatever they made, but she wanted them to make what she had designed. So she created a space where she created social obligations from them, and really kind of came from like, I need to develop social capital with these people. And then over time, they do begin to recognize that the nonlinear thinking that we're super good at is, oh, so like, because you say something and suddenly they recognize like, oh, that was actually a good idea. Why not I thought of that? And then you kind of repeatedly do it. And I find with data scientists and engineers also, like, they think the work is to come up with one good idea. It's like, dude, I have like a good idea every 2 minutes. Like, this is good ideas are a dime a dozen. Let's generate a bunch of ideas. And if you can get that culture change with them, then they kind of become dependent on you. And that's where you want to be. And so I'm a designer in a computer science department because I want to work with computer scientists. I don't need other people to come up with ideas. I'm good at that. So I think also, like, can you change your context so that you're working with, like, in their space, not in a space only surrounded by other designers, which I like that too. It's very validating and reinforcing, but it doesn't grow you in the same way if you can live in the hostile territory for a while.
That's a very good, yeah, very good point. Because I oftentimes getting other people to understand what designer are trying to do, it's hard to convince them. It's very hard when you're working with salespeople. It's a different technique too. Do you have any bad experiences? Have difficulty working with other teams, and how did you solve it?
Yeah, I mean, I've so many stories of like things that have gone off the rails.
Oh no.
I think you can't save every situation, but in the same way, hopefully when you do a design, you create a process book and you kind of try to reflect on what you learned doing that to improve your practice, doing that with your collaborations, spending a little bit of time to say, why didn't that work? The other thing I would strongly stress, and this really has nothing to do with AI, but very much with practice, finding collaborators that complement your strength. So I am very good at ideation, like that's why I do most of my work there. I'm like a disaster when it comes to like executive function, like showing up for meetings on time or just at all, stuff like remembering things. I do that very poorly, but I work with people that are good at that side, right? And you're building a set of collaborators where each of you do your best work with each other, and those kinds of partnerships, because you can't do it all. Like even all of UX is more than anyone can do. So can you find the part that you really love and like grow that, knowing that other people will pick up the other parts, but you're looking for the other people that are good at those parts.
I see.
Yeah, I think trying to do it all is just, that's the road to failure. And trust, like I trust my my technical collaborators, because mostly like 90% of the time they just tell me no. You learn to like not let that bother you, but you just persist. You kind of keep at them. You need to tell me no, but you need to tell me why. Like, I want to get closer. It's like, no, not that exact thing, but can I get something like that thing? And that kind of negotiation. So this is maybe almost the opposite of that, but in the work with the ICU docs, we were doing a similar thing where they were like, oh, I want you to make me an AI system that will take my crappy notes and write notes that patients will understand, but that are accurate. And I'm like, dude, I can't do that. But like we talked about it a little bit, and it's sort of like, how many of your patients actually read the notes? I could totally tell you which patients read the notes. Like I can look through a log and say, yeah, these people never look at the notes. Why write good notes for them? You don't need to write good notes for everybody. Just write them for the people that read them. And, you know, it's that negotiation of, I want this. Yeah, I can't give you that. But what can I reasonably give you? And I think when you can get that interplay with any kind of collaborator, you tend to get to new places, not things you could think of or they could think of, but together, it's a place you can only get in collaboration.
This
Thank
tool
you.
totally brings out the point that I think designers need very good soft skills, communication skills, persuasion skills, social skills to, you know, bring candy to tech people, right? So they get on your side, right? Yeah.
That's how we pick on AI. Handy, guys. Thank you so much, John.
Okay.
Sure.
Other questions?
Next one's from Tyler.
Yeah, hi. Thank you for having me.
Hello, Tyler.
So I just have a question about how AI will affect UX writing and content design, because a lot of teams don't hire this position already and just allow the designer to do the microcopy. So does that seem the most replaceable?
Yep. But is it a good UX job? I like to say that, like, that is not an awesome job, right? It's not like I'm doing this because I can do it good enough, but it's not actually the thing I'm trained to do. So I think that again is where AI will do the most, where you're already having someone who's very non-professional just do a good enough job of it because you didn't care enough to do it well. And that's maybe a sensitivity to recognize. So back in the olden days, when we were first doing interfaces and we looked at like paper forms, how do people work with paper forms so we can think about how the computer should work? What we really looked at is where were people like using Post-it notes and other things because the forms weren't working, right? Like you're paying attention to the breakdowns. And so the fact that I'm, you know, in a sense, adding roles and responsibilities to someone that doesn't have the training should be like an indicator of low quality will work here. And I don't mean to imply that you're doing low quality work, but that just that specific task isn't that demanding of it.
Okay, I got you. Thank you.
Anything else? Books about the dangers of biases and algorithm. Jacqueline, do you want to ask your question?
Oh, not a question. When during that discussion about like how can we learn more about AI sometimes, and I don't know if I'm misconstruing it, but I've found like books about misconstruing algorithms or the bias in algorithms helpful. So that was just
So where I think that this is, again, I'm going to always come back to ideation. There was some point where they chose to make that biased system that they might have just made something else. And what we're interested in is, could they have generated an idea that was just as valuable, but didn't have an ethical risk? And so in the way that we ideate and sort of process things, can I be more sensitive? Like we're super sensitive to like, oh my God, users don't want that, right? We get rid of those things right away. We're not very sensitive to, does this thing actually make revenue for the service? Service designers are better at that. UX designers kind of suck at it. But if we're paying attention to both of those risks, the data scientists are paying attention to, can we build it? I kind of leave that to them. But with the data scientists, can you say, oh my God, this is using language data. It's very likely to be biased and racist because of the data sets it was trained on. Is there a completely different application that is just as valuable that simply avoids that problem? And I think that's where designer design can come in, because you're much better at just getting people to generate lots of ideas.
John, previously you mentioned about like, the reason why there's this AI innovation gap is designs are brought too late in the process, like painting lipstick on a pig. Sometimes
Yeah.
I wonder if we just, as a design community, are we just using the wrong word to describe what we do? Because 9 out of 10 times, like people think designers equals make things pretty, like,
Right.
making it right. But then when we say, hey, no, we're not, like, I think everybody kind of struggles to convince other people that we're not just making things pretty, right? So what is the word, like, are we describing ourselves the wrong way? Like, what is the word or skill set that differentiates us,
Yeah, I don't think that designers are doing it wrong, but that there's this sort of evolutionary process. So if you think of if we think of cars as a class of designed products, at first it was like, can I just make a car that I can sell for less than it costs me to build it, and that is reliable enough to be useful? And design's not going to add a lot in that space. But as it matures, now I've moved into a space where like a customer has a choice, and they could choose this thing or this thing. Now this is definitely where design adds value. So I think it's much more of a timing issue. And if it's just like, can we get this to even work? We're just in the way. And, let them figure out that. But as it reaches a certain level of maturity, and as it moves into this space of value and choice, meaning, now I actually need designers. And the companies that do that just make a ton more money. And there was just some work by, I'm not going to think of their name, one of the futuring companies, anyway. And they were talking about who's making money with AI. And they were like, companies that are using design thinking are making a lot more revenue from their AI initiatives. And it's like, I am not surprised. McKinsey has a new McKinsey report. But changing cultures within organizations is hard. And because data scientists are new, because they're all paid a ridiculous amount of money because they're underproduced, right? There's much higher demand than, and because there isn't like 20 years of data science practice. It's way newer than UX. Mm-hmm. So we don't have mature processes. They don't have experience of ever working with a designer, right? They're right out of school. Nobody's ever talked about ideation. So I think we're just kind of at this weird inflection point.
Yeah.
And that things will get better.
It's like 20 years ago when graphic designers were working with HTML programmers, right? It's like that phase right now. So I guess, yeah, even with like, blockchain and all this like crypto stuff, it's around for 10 years, more than 10 years, and still like it's not mass market yet because it's so hard to use. And the bulk of the community are tech people, coming up with really hard to use stuff. And maybe there's just not enough designers involved in the space. And also part of it is our designers describing what they do in an effective way, right? So that other people recognize they need to work with us, right? Yeah.
Well, and I think of things like Snapchat filters. I just love that example because augmented reality had been around since, maybe 2009. People were already doing stuff with it, the techies, but it was one of those like, can we actually think of an application that makes money and isn't just like burning cycles on your phone? And it was like that was so fast and generated so much value for Snap. And now, of course, everybody's doing it. But none of the people that were working on augmented reality needed a designer because they had applications in mind that were totally wrong. They were just never going to like, I am making, they're making it for science or whatever. So we kind of like almost have to let that first wave get out of the way, because you know they're making the tech, they're making that first cassette deck, which was really hard, but they're totally not making boom boxes and Walkmans. And it's sort of, what's that transition point where we're moving now? Okay, now we're going to make the cool stuff. It's not really about the tech anymore. It's about recognizing this capability is valuable and I'm giving it a form and a meaning. That's where design loves to live.
How do you describe to tech people, data scientists, like AI people, what you do when you meet them for the first time?
I don't always do that. Like I often just pretend to be a computer scientist. Right? Like I don't, I can do that because I know enough of the language that I can fake it. Until I recognize like, oh, here's something that they would benefit from. Like, oh, I can build on your idea without making you think it's a terrible idea, but truly it's a terrible idea. But I'm going to do kind of a yes and you sort of like acculturate them very slowly.
Wait, why do you have to pretend to be a computer scientist?
It's like
Does saying a designer put them
to hide in the background. So if you're in the space of computer scientists, it's like you don't want to call attention to yourself until you're ready to like impress them. So I'm not, you know, I work with Jody for Lizzie a lot. She and I have been working together for years. And Jody being like a designer, but also like a senior woman in computer science, she's like, I'm the person with two heads. When I walk into the room, everybody's like, why is there a woman here? Why is there a designer? Right. So she also does it, but it's harder to fake that other part. Right. So I think, again, in those spaces, it's easy to just work and wait for your moments and not build some false expectation because, like you said, they think of design as decoration. So as soon as they've already put that label, just wanted you to decorate something. So I don't come at it like that. I start to do the stuff like, oh, I'm going to reframe this. I'm going to offer you some better ideas that are more valuable. And they're like, oh, you think really differently. It's like, yeah, I'm a designer. Let it come out after some success.
Is there a better word to describe what we do, you think?
No. I mean, I don't think it's words. It's experience. People have to have had the experience of working with someone and then they get it. But...
Okay. Oh, Jacqueline? Oh, Lisa has a hand up. Lisa?
Hi.
Hi.
I was just I meant to ask where I could find your papers, but I found them via your website. So could I send you a message if I have questions about some of the papers you've published?
Sure.
Or is there someone else I should pester because you're busy?
Well, no, I mean, like probably me, and I may send you to somebody that's more the expert.
Okay.
Like mostly now, because of my role, my students do the work and I raise the money.
Got it.
I'm like a design director in a sense, more than the hands-on person. So if you were like, oh, I really want to know about this, I'd probably know a lot less than some student or former student. I can just send you to them and they're the real expert.
Okay. Yep. Been there. I just came out of 7 years at a computer, mostly wireless communications research lab. So transitioning to UX because I was looking to deal with more users and I'm very tired of staring at switches. So yeah, I was laughing earlier at your comment though. It's like, yeah, I know I've walked into the wrong classroom if you're a girl in any of the STEM, in electrical engineering in particular. I know I've walked into the wrong classroom if there are more than two girls, myself included.
Yep.
So
I'm hoping it's changing. And I feel like UX is actually getting more diverse, certainly a lot more diverse than when I started.
Daniel, you had one question?
Yeah. I noticed the clock. It's already 6:30. So I think I will just ask John one more question. Is if we have more questions for you, how do people reach out to you? I know you're super busy guy. Would LinkedIn works or?
No, I mean, I would say email is the best way. It's hard for me to make promises with time and attention. It's the thing I don't have.
But we've time.
Well, yeah. So if there's a lot of people that want to know something, then like scheduling an event, a conversation, I think forums like this work well for me. I get like 200 to 300 emails a day. I have to prioritize like my tuition paying students.
Sure.
just
Yeah.
how-
If there's demand, we can definitely do like maybe a workshop or other AI related events. So there's a bigger audience. Okay, great. Daniel, do you want to ask your data designer question?
I was just out of curiosity because you mentioned that there are some new guys in the team and they call themselves a data designer. So
Yep.
I wonder what data do they design or what do they do?
So this is coming from a bunch of different places, but I'd say the strongest I've seen is from the Netherlands, people at the Technical University in Eindhoven and at Delft. I don't know if do you guys know Ron Wakari at Simon Fraser?
Yeah.
Yes, you taught me before.
He's also got an appointment, or Will Odom, like Will, one of my former PhD students, amazing. Actually just is running a workshop at Kai on data design. Go talk to Will. He's like around the corner from you and probably knows way more than me. But it's this sense of data is a new material. We're making these things that are logging our behavior. How do we kind of get into the aesthetics of data? How do we engage with it as a material? And so there's just some super creative people, and it's new. And so it's not like it's a thing. They're just sort of calling themselves this. And I think they're onto something. So I would say, yeah. Like, go do what they're doing. That seems to be working.
Great. Great suggestion for next speaker. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much, John, for all your insights and sharing. Yeah, it was a mind upgrade today. Thank you.
Just one last thing.